Our first lesson in this module is asset visibility. We're going to talk about total asset awareness and why it's important for us to gather data to help us inform resource allocation and inform the different investments that we're making on our assets. Here are our lesson objectives for this lesson. I hope by the end of this lesson that you will have the basics of asset visibility, that you're able to understand how asset visibility is the foundation for SMS or sustainment management systems. And then I want you to understand how Uniformat 2 helps us structure our asset inventory. So we're going to talk about how Uniformat 2 is a work breakdown structure that we use in the Air Force. And here's our roadmap for this lesson. We're first going to define asset visibility. What does it mean to us? And what does Merriam-Webster say it is? What is visibility, particularly for assets? And how should we think about it in the Air Force? The motivation for asset visibility. Why should we care about asset visibility? And then we're going to talk about sustainment management systems as an asset visibility tool. And then we're going to end with some resources that you can go to if you want to know more about asset visibility. So remember in Module 1 how we talked about the asset management framework, and we have all these principles and all these pillars. For this lesson, we're going to talk particularly about this principle, visibility, right? And remember these 4 basic questions of asset management. What do we have? What condition are our assets in? How important are our assets to us? And then, once we know that, what are we going to do with them? Start making some asset management decisions. So, asset visibility is all about these first 3 questions, okay? If we can answer these first 3 questions, if we have data to support the answers to these questions, then we have a good grasp of asset visibility for our asset portfolio. So, in this lesson, we're going to talk about our assets inventories, how our inventory is structured, how do we populate our asset inventory. In our life cycle lesson later on in this module, we're going to talk about condition and how we can assess the conditions of our assets. And then we're going to talk about the MDI in Module 3 and how we can figure out how important our assets are to us. So what does asset visibility mean? According to Merriam-Webster, the visibility is all about the state of being able to be seen, how prominent is something to us, and then what is the distance that we can see something. Okay, so that's visibility. Asset visibility is defined as the result of accurate horizontal and vertical infrastructure data which supports resource allocation and operational decisions. If you take anything away from this lesson, I want you to understand that asset visibility is all about gathering data to support decisions, okay? If the data doesn't support decisions, then maybe we shouldn't be gathering that data. Maybe we shouldn't be using resources to gather that data. If the data is not good quality, then that poor quality data is not going to inform decisions in an optimal way. So, why are we talking about asset visibility? Why does it matter? Asset visibility is all about total asset awareness. Everything that we can know about our assets to help us inform decisions, that's what we're about in asset visibility. We want to have enough information in order to make good asset management decisions. So, at the tactical level, what are we talking about? At the tactical level, we could answer these questions, and these come out of the Ops Engineering Playbook. Wouldn't it be nice with asset visibility if we had a good understanding of what compromises our portfolio? Okay? Do we even know what assets that we have? That's that first asset management question. We're going to talk about how our inventory is structured. At the tactical level, we need to know how are our systems, how are our components and sections structured, and can we quantify those? Have we identified how our assets are composed in different facilities? Do we even have awareness of those? Okay? And then what don't we have awareness on? What blind spots do we have? Is there data that we have not populated yet that we can't make good asset management decisions on because we just don't have any information to base our decisions on. And then by knowing what we have and what condition our assets are in and how important our stuff is, we can identify where our worst stuff is, okay? When I'm racking and stacking all my assets, do I know where my problem children are? Do I know what's eating my lunch? Do I know what's taking up all of my time and effort? Where is our worst stuff? And on top of that, what should I actually invest in? Where is my best investment decision going to take place? Okay, so it's not just about how poor our assets are in condition. It's also about how important that asset is, and if it makes good asset management sense to invest in that asset. At the strategic level, we can answer a few more questions. So we're at a higher level here, and asset visibility at this level boosts the relationships between the assets and their users, okay? When we're talking about our users, all the different stakeholders, we need to understand what it is that they value, what their priorities are, because if we don't know what they value, then how do we extract value from their assets? How do we know whether those assets are performing the way that they want them to, okay? How do we know if their assets are actually delivering the service that the customer needs, okay? So at the strategic level, we can start to tie an asset to a core function, tie an investment to a core function. We can build a defensible POM position. POM is Program Objective Memorandum, and that's basically all the requirements that we have for our assets. And once we know what those requirements are, we send those up through the activity management plan process. And at the big Air Force level, at the strategic level, we can say, for the Air Force, in order for us to maintain our assets, this is every single requirement that we have, and this is how much money we need in order to execute those requirements, okay? And then we can also communicate the implications of degraded funding. So here's the entire list of requirements that we have, but realistically, this is how much money we're going to get. So if we get this amount of money, we can't execute everything below this line. What's going to happen if we don't execute those everything below that line? We're going to start taking risk in those areas. What are the implications of that degraded funding, right? And then what if we knew exactly what would happen if we didn't receive optimal facility investments, okay? So if we're not making investments at the lowest life cycle cost, at the optimal time in a facility's life cycle, what's going to happen? So the data that we get that builds our asset visibility, that data supports all of these questions. So what does asset visibility do for us? Again, it increases our awareness of our assets, okay? How does it do that? By gathering two types of data. First, we have inventory data. This is also known as persistent data because this is data that just does not change over time. Some examples you can read here are facility number. That doesn't change over time. A facility's location doesn't change over time. Typically, the type of a facility, it doesn't change day to day. Maybe we recapitalize a building and maybe we repurpose it for another use, but that type of facility typically on a day-to-day does not change, as well as the size does not change, okay? And then the other type of data is what we call attribute data. This data is dynamic, it changes over time. So we're talking about asset usage. If we actually change how that asset is used, then it's dynamic data. If the value of our asset changes because of maybe the condition, maybe that condition is degrading and the value that we're extracting from that asset and that asset's ability to provide value and provide a service to the customers, maybe that changes over time as the asset degrades. Age, obviously, over time will change. Maintenance history based off of who is maintaining that asset, maybe the level of expertise for the different maintainers for that asset will change as people flow in and out of the squadron, maybe PCS. And then operating and repair costs as well as condition will change over time. Okay, so what does it really mean? Asset visibility is all about seeking accurate information or knowledge about our assets to enable informed decisions. There's that foot stomp again, okay? Asset visibility is all about enabling informed decisions. If the data doesn't enable informed decisions, then it's bad data, it's data that we don't need, it's data we cannot operationalize, okay? So how do we start getting this data? For facilities, it starts with FCAs. Those are facility condition assessments, okay? So it starts with those efforts, and it starts with understanding how these different systems in our facilities are structured, how the inventory of our facilities are structured. We're going to talk about that later in this lesson. For TNAP, or Transportation Networks and Airfield Pavements, it starts with your PCI. That's our Pavement Condition Index, okay? So looking at the condition of our pavements, typically we get that information from contractors and the APE team. And then looking at our paver database for our transportation networks and airfield pavements, their sustainment management system is paver, okay? So starting to look at the data that's in that database. And then for utilities, it starts with understanding linear segmentation and where you are in the process. We're not going to talk a lot about linear segmentation in this course, but if you want to know more, I encourage you to reach out to AFIT and start taking those other asset management classes for linear segmentation and how we start to break down our utility systems, our linear and nonlinear systems, and how do we structure those inventories. So sustainment management systems are a tool that we can use for asset visibility, okay? For facilities, again, we have builder sustainment management systems. For transportation networks and airfield pavements, we have paver. And for utilities, currently we have GeoBase. What we're trying to move to and what AFCEC is currently working on is the utility sustainment management system. So we got checks on these because we already have it. Paver's been around for a long time. Builder has been around for a shorter time than paver, but utilities, it's not around yet. Where this is going to come out in the future. So how do we populate our facility inventory? There's really two ways, and throughout the Air Force, and depending on your particular squadron, your manpower, and the level of expertise in your organization, these different methods will work depending on your situation. So the first method is the FCAT. This is the Facility Condition Assessment Team. This is typically a team stood up in R&O, Requirements and Optimization, and this team is dedicated to completing all their facility assessments. The other method is the maintenance-based approach. And this is where folks in the shop, when they're going out and they're doing maintenance, they can also do assessments at that time. Okay, so this is kind of indirect work. They're not actually turning a wrench, but they're conducting the assessments. Kind of advantages to this every touch approach is that you have a larger group of people doing this. You have more people going out and getting eyes on your assets, performing these assessments, and by dividing and conquering and having this large group of people doing this, you could arguably complete your assessments in a shorter amount of time and lessen the burden on any particular person. The downside of this, as you can see, if you have a large group of people doing this, that requires a lot of training, okay? So with facility condition assessment teams, it's a smaller group of people. You can train them up in a shorter amount of time, and they can start getting really, really good at the assessments that they're doing. So theoretically, you'll have a much more standardized process with your facility condition assessment team, and it's not as much effort to get those guys trained up. So if you're doing maintenance-based approach, and a lot of bases are, you really have to strive to have good quality data, standardized processes for how you're conducting this, and standardized processes for how you're conducting these assessments. So let's talk about Uniformat 2 now. This is all about how our inventory is structured. There's really two different types of work breakdown structures. There's Uniformat 2 and there's master format. Master format is more materials based, and that's good for when we're designing projects and maybe we're developing estimates. Uniformat 2 is more systems based, okay? Uniformat 2 breaks built infrastructure assets down into different elements, and these elements are more manageable. These elements are made up of major components that are common to most buildings. So we're going to talk about systems, components, and sections as an Air Force adaptation to the Uniformat 2 structure. Uniformat 2 is used in industry. These work breakdown structures are used all over the world. It's not specific just to the Air Force, okay? So here's the key concept. You need to understand that the use of Uniformat 2 as a work breakdown structure ensures consistency in the manner by which we manage our facility assets, whether it be maintenance, repair, or construction, okay? So by having this standard work breakdown structure, we can be consistent throughout the Air Force. At every single squadron, when we look at their sustainment management system data, we know that their data is broken down, their inventory data is broken down in the same way. So here's a little example of how Uniformat 2 is broken down. We have different levels, and this is a hierarchy, okay? So at the top, you have major group elements, and then you have group elements for level 2, individual elements for level 3, and then you got sub-elements for level 4. So I'm going to show you different major group elements, different group elements, and give you examples of each of these in the coming slides. So for that level 1, major group elements, Uniformat 2, if you Google it, these will pop up, okay? These are the different major group elements that we have. Substructure, shell, interior, services, equipment and furnishings, special construction and demolition, and then site work. So notice that each of these have a letter at the beginning of their row, at the beginning of their bullet, A through G, okay? So you don't have to memorize these now, but you'll see that as you start looking at the data more and getting more familiar with the data, that a lot of these letters are going to start to appear again. You're going to start to memorize these as we go, okay? So remember those letters. Those letters signify those major group elements. Now we're at group elements, and within each of those letters we have another breakdown. So for A, for example, we have A10 and A20. Those are foundations and basement construction. So you can see how each of the major group elements are further broken down into group elements. And then one below that level, level 3, we have individual elements. Okay, so even further, so you had D major group elements, 30 group elements, and now we're at D3010 for individual elements. This gets further into the weeds. You get more detail at this point, and you start to see how our assets are getting more detailed. We're getting more information about our asset. We're not just talking about our building. We're talking specifically about the energy supply element of our building. Okay, and then you can even go one level below that, and we have the individual sub-elements level. Okay, so these are just some examples. I don't expect you to have all of these memorized. I just want you to understand how Uniformat 2 breaks down the different systems of a building into more manageable elements. Okay? So, as an Air Force, we have adapted Uniformat 2 to help us understand, especially for facilities, but also for utilities and transportation networks and airfield pavements. We have adapted Uniformat 2 to help us understand and more easily relate to the assets that we have. So we have here a backflow preventer. So we have subtypes, we have the sections for the backflow preventer, we have our components, and the system. Okay, and all of those are part of the facility. So we see that each of these levels, our facility is broken down, and that backflow preventer is the particular asset that we're concerned with. Okay, so it's at this level, at the subtype and the section level, that we're actually going out and doing assessments. We can't assess. You assess a system based off of the different things that make it up. You assess a system based off of the condition of its components. You assess components based off of the condition of the different sections that make up that component. Okay, so this is just an example to kind of illustrate an actual asset, this backflow preventer we have behind me. Okay, so when we're populating our inventory, what are some attributes that we're concerned with? What kind of information do we want to get? Here's some examples specifically for a backflow preventer. We want to know about the size, what capacity is that backflow preventer, right? What kind of type is it? Maybe manufacturer specs. Who made this? What is the typical service life of this backflow preventer? When was this backflow preventer installed? So if we know when it was installed, we can kind of predict, okay, it typically has this service life. When should this asset fail in an ideal world? Okay, and then how many? The quantity. How many of these assets do we have? Okay, and then also, what's the remaining service life, and how much does this thing cost? So if we can answer some of these questions, like what type is it, how old it is, and how many are there, we have some good information that we can use to inform other decisions, like, okay, how many more do we need? When should we replace these things? When does this asset require maintenance? And when should we be repairing it? Okay. So for the Air Force facilities, we have a sustainment management system called Builder, and there are 7 systems that are required to be inventoried for Builder. Okay, we have B20, exterior enclosures. Remember, B is that major group element, and then 20, we have that just that group element. So in the Air Force, these are the systems that need to be inventoried. B20, exterior enclosure, B30, roofing, C10, interior construction, D20, plumbing, D30, HVAC, D40, fire protection, and then lastly, D50, electrical. So these 7 systems should have been already assessed, already populated into each of your base's sustainment management system. Okay, so this should be the baseline data that we have to work with. Now, there are more than just these 7 systems. There's 13 critical systems that we're going to talk about in the next slide, but there's over 20 total systems that a facility can have. So just because we have these 7 systems populated doesn't mean that's where we stop populating our inventory. Okay, we have to continue to gain asset visibility, gain awareness of our different assets, and to continue gaining data on those other systems. So how do we gain data on those systems? How do we standardize the way that different squadrons, different R&O shops, whether you have an FCAT, the Facility Condition Assessment Team, or whether you're doing a maintenance-based approach, how do we standardize the way that we're doing our assessments? Well, we have AFCAT produced a Built Infrastructure Inventory and Assessment Manual. There's 13 of these. You can get to them by going to this link, and I encourage you to have these are appendices to the SMS playbook. I encourage you to print these out. There's one for each of the 13 critical systems, and when you go into these manuals, it tells you all about how to assess each of the different systems. It has pictures so you know that this is what red looks like, this is what green looks like, this is what amber looks like, and it has examples, so that way we can start justifying and standardizing the way that we're doing assessments throughout the Air Force. So with asset visibility, it's very important that we have a comprehensive inventory. When we have a comprehensive inventory, we're able to get to this goal of making optimal resource investments, optimal resource decisions. Okay? So remember, as our inventory grows, and say we're building off of those 7 systems that have already been inventoried, and we're getting towards the 13, and we're getting towards 21 and 22 systems worth of data in our sustainment management systems. As our inventory grows, so does our asset visibility. We start getting more awareness of our assets, having a deeper understanding of our portfolio and how our portfolio is structured. Also, with our inventory, we can start to pinpoint which systems are degrading and which systems may require more attention as opposed to only looking at the facility level. We can start to pinpoint, we can start to rack and stack different systems, different components, and different sections on our base and start making investment decisions on those as opposed to entire facilities. Okay, so it kind of gives us a deeper level of detail. And then lifecycle management is all about the section level. Remember I said this is the level that we care about. This is the level that we're actually gathering information on. You're going to learn how, in the life cycle lesson, you're going to learn how the condition of the sections will actually build into the conditions of the components and then the systems and then the facility. So if we're able to get the condition of our sections, then we're able to calculate the conditions of everything above that. And then here's another example of our Air Force's adaptation of Uniformat 2. Instead of major group elements, we call them systems in the Air Force. Okay, so that's D for D30 is for HVAC, and D is services for our major group elements. And here's just an example for D30. The different components are heat generating components and cooling generating components. And then if you want to know what sections make up heat generating component, for example, we have these different sections. So it's at these sections we can actually go assess a boiler. We can get installation information on that boiler. When was that boiler installed? What was the manufacturer of that boiler? How many boilers do we have in that facility? When is that boiler predicted to fail? What is the service life for that boiler? So it's at this level that we want to have as much detail as possible to inform decisions. So that was facilities. For transportation networks, it's broken down a little differently. Instead of systems, we have facilities. Remember, for facility systems, we had facilities and systems and components, then sections. For transportation, it's a little different. We have facilities where this is based off of the CAT code. So what is that kind of pavement type? Is it an apron? Is it a taxiway? Is it a runway? That's what the different facilities are, and each of those facilities have a specified and assigned category code. Okay, and then we have different branches, and that's how that apron or that's how that runway is broken up. And then we have sections. So what is the actual name of that particular portion of the runway? So high-level example of how transportation networks and airfield pavements inventory is broken down. I don't expect you to memorize each of these CAT codes or memorize specifically how branches and sections are named. I just want you to understand that there are different levels for this hierarchy. And then also for utilities. At the top, we have asset type, and then it's broken down on whether that utility system is linear or nonlinear, okay? And then we have geographical and functional areas, groupings, and segments. So just like how transportation networks, just like how facilities are broken down, with their inventory is broken down to different levels, utilities also are broken down into different levels. And if we're able to assess the condition of the different segments and we can have information at this level, it'll build up and we can have total asset awareness of our different utility systems. So let's talk about breadth versus depth in asset visibility. I know you can't read this, but this is a report pulled out of our sustainment management system called Builder. So this is a Final 9 report, and we have lots of information where every single row in this spreadsheet is a facility. So when we're talking about breadth, that's how many assets are actually visible. Okay? How many different assets do we know that we have, that we are aware are in our portfolio? When we talk about depth, every single column in this spreadsheet is a different piece of information on a particular asset. So when we're talking about depth, it's how many elements of data are actually populated for each asset. What's most important? What do we care more about? Do we care more about breadth? Do we care more about depth? Well, it actually depends, right? And it all comes down to balancing risk. So we have to use engineering judgment, we have to gather information, and we have to use that information, operationalize that data to inform our decisions. And knowing that our resources are limited, we have to start making decisions on what we're actually going to invest in. So at the facility level, real property data was pooled, and it should bring in everything we know about our facilities. And that's how Builder was populated. It took real property spreadsheets and it populated Builder, so every building on our base, we knew it was documented, it was inventoried, but as new buildings come online, we have to constantly update that data. So at the system level, when we're talking about what's most important, you should focus on those 7 critical systems. So make sure that you have all the information that you can about those, at least those 7 systems, and that's a good place to start. At the component level, let's focus on those things that are important. We're going to have an MDI, or Mission Dependency Index, lesson in Module 3. Let's focus on those things that are high priority, have a high mission dependency index, and let's focus on those things that are actually degraded, have a low condition index, okay? So those are kind of our worst and most important things first at the component level. Here's a caveat. Don't collect data that serves no purpose, okay? If we're collecting data that doesn't actually help us get to a resource decision and an investment decision, then why are we spending time, why are we spending effort collecting that data? Are we going around and are we counting the different outlets in a building? What are we counting the number of light fixtures in a building? If that data helps us, then great. If it doesn't help us, stop using man hours, stop using effort to collect that data if it doesn't serve a purpose. So if you want to learn more about asset visibility, there's some resources out there for you. I encourage you to take ownership of your activity and increase your awareness of your assets so that way you can make better decisions. Okay? So there's all these resources out there for you. There's this asset visibility toolbox that you can start building. AFCEC COA, that's the Asset Visibility Division of AFCEC, is the asset visibility business owner. And they have sustainment management system experts. They own the different playbooks for sustainment management systems. They own the APE team, that's the Airfield Pavement Evaluation team. And they also send out these different AV grams, asset visibility grams, every so often that kind of help you improve asset visibility at your base. Some of the asset visibility grams help you clean up your data, clean up your inventory so that way you can make better decisions. And here's an example of one of those asset visibility grams. Okay, so this is the first one, and it was called Guidance for Correcting Builder Data Inputs. So in sustainment management systems, it's humans that are actually putting information in, and there's potential for human error. So what this asset visibility gram does is it helps us focus on some of the common errors for builder data inputs and helps us correct those. So here's what we talked about in this lesson. We defined what asset visibility is. We talked about the why. Why is it important for us to know about asset visibility? What are some of the questions that we can answer if we have this information? We talked about how sustainment management systems are used as an asset visibility tool, how our inventory is structured using Uniformat 2, and then we finished off with some resources for asset visibility. So to end, the key to building our data foundation is for every single airman every day to constantly feed this beast, feed this sustainment management system. If every airman acts as a sensor and goes out and reports what they see and validate what they're seeing in reality actually matches what the sustainment management system is saying, then we can start to have a stronger foundation of data that will help inform our decisions. All right, this concludes our asset visibility lesson. Look forward to seeing you next in Lifecycle.